Hi, everyone. So excited to be here with you today. I'm Kellie Capote CCO here at Gainsight, and we're going to talk about customer success as a growth engine, which is certainly one of my favorite topics. So in terms, just real quick, I want to set the table in terms of what I'm hoping to cover in the next 20, 25, 30 minutes. First and foremost, I think we hear this terminology of customer success as a growth engine, but I wanted to take a few minutes and unpack in terms of what do I really mean by customer success as a growth engine? And then more importantly, why is it so fundamental when we think about organizations and really driving towards sustainable growth? And then last but not least, we'll get a little bit tactical. I want to make sure I share a few pieces of inspiration in terms of, well, then what are the strategies that organizations are actually employing to go drive net retention and company-wide success across our businesses? So let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so to kick things off, for those of you who may or may not have followed Gainsight, we have certainly been the trailblazers, so to speak, in the world of customer success. So in the early days, if you recognize the Blue Book, it was very much about, customer success was seen in the light of being on the defense. How do we prevent the leaky bucket of churn, and how do we, drive risk mitigation? And we have slowly evolved, especially over the past 3 to 5 years, to really kind of flip that on its head. And to a point where customer success is quite honestly seen as existential within organizations today. One of the interesting things, if I rewind the clock and look back on 2020, which we can probably think of a lot of bad things, but probably one of the quote unquote good things or silver lining is I think that it really stood as a catalyst to really drive increased appreciation for how powerful our install base is and how it's a necessity for our organizations to really drive customer centricity in terms of everything that we do. So that's the orange book that you see here. That's the most recent book, The Customer Success Economy. And it really talks about this paradigm shift that customer success, it's no longer just about retention and churn, but at the end of the day, it's quite frankly the flywheel that's going to drive your business to the accelerated growth that we're all aiming for today. So to double click into that and to put a bit of a finer point on it, let's talk about why, like what's the evolution that customer success has gone through. So this is a fun little maturity pyramid is what I like to call it. And if you start at the bottom, this is really where we were even probably 3 years ago, 5 years ago, where it was largely about like, is the customer deployed and are we supporting them? And in many cases, it was more of a reactive type of support model. We then sort of said, okay, that's obviously not good enough, especially as we saw the subscription economy and recurring business models really start to take front and center stage. And we moved to this period of like everything was oriented around usage and adoption. And that's now become table stakes, quite frankly. Like if there isn't adoption in your product or your solution, there's no chance that you're driving value or stickiness. So while that is still present, and it's one of the measures and metrics that most CS organizations still look at, we've kind of elevated ourselves, or most organizations, I would say, are in the process of trying to cross that chasm from usage and adoption to this notion of outcomes and value. So we really believe that the next frontier is all about outcomes-based selling and delivery, because at the end of the day, customers, are demanding that they have certain business problems, and how is their investment and solution neatly mapped to that, where we're able to drive predictable and prescriptive outcomes time and time again. And then at the top, this is kind of the holy grail, ultimate goal. I would say many organizations are not there yet, but that's just kicking it up another level and really bringing kind of this maturity, or what we call stickiness lens, into the equation. And how do you get so mission critical that there's absolutely no way your customer would want to rip you out? So that's a little bit of the journey that we've been on in customer success. And it's been a lot of fun because it's really changed the lens and the level of sort of strategic appreciation that we have for the practice of customer success. And one of the things that we're seeing show up in the market is this increased appreciation where we now believe that net revenue retention is the North Star metric. So, often like companies and organizations and investors are looking at growth rates, but net revenue retention has become really the most commonly looked at metric for a few different reasons. So first and foremost, if you start with the one on the left, net gross retention at a certain point in time becomes a little bit of like a check mark. Like once you get to a certain sustainable point of gross retention, investing into a 1% maybe increase is just not yielding the same type of business benefits as if you were to go invest that in the right set of customers who have the propensity to expand and where you can really drive exponential growth. And then to do so, if you think about really what customer success is all about, net revenue retention is the ROI of customer success. It's empowering our teams and our organizations to think about from day one, who is the right target customer, and spending our energy and our resources in the right places against the right, target customer profile so that we can really yield the best bang for our buck and business results. And the only way that we get there is by orienting around this notion of outcomes. So we've got to nail the original sales goals. Why did they buy? How do we document that? And then how do we earn that right to expand time and time again so that we have customers for life and a really seamless customer experience along the way? And we believe that this aligns well with the shifting mindset of customer success. So net revenue retention is all around long-term growth. And that's really where customer success is headed. It's how do we provide and deliver these predictable outcomes that drive a wonderful experience and increase, business value back to our customers and our partners. And this is just, this is showing that, the market is seeing this as well. This is a McKinsey article. This is actually a few years back now, where there's so much appreciation, not only in the world of customer success, but investors and third parties, that this is really the cornerstone of everyone's business strategy here in 2021. So now let's talk a little bit about like, why is this important, and like what are some of the driving factors behind this? At the end of the day, net revenue retention drives valuation. So what we're seeing is that there's an incredibly strong correlation between net revenue retention rates and that of enterprise value. So if you go up into the right, it's pretty incredible to see. And it's the second top metric that businesses and investors are looking at in addition to growth as these valuations are created. So getting this right, obviously, there's lots of reasons for leaning into this. And so as we think about net retention, we've got to put this notion of like customer success equals CSM way behind us and realize that it's a company-wide goal and it's a company-wide effort. So the organizations that are driving world-class net retention rates into the 125s and 135s and higher, they've made this a company-wide imperative, and they've orchestrated all the key customer-facing functions around the same customer-centric goals and outcomes. So this is what we call sort of our playbook to thrive. And it's really bringing that connective tissue across sales. You could put marketing there as well. All your post-sales team, CSM, services and support, and product as sort of the three key players. And how do we bring those synergies together and drive really incredible collaboration to deliver some of the workflows that you see along the edges? And we'll talk about a few of those here as we go, but really, starting really customer success starts in sales. How do we identify the outcomes and neatly hand that off to the success organization? How does the success organization be the voice of the customer and feed all that goodness back into product, and then leverage the product to actually drive adoption for your customers? And then how do we make it a more efficient go-to-market strategy by using our product and understanding the right target profile to bring the right people in the door in the most cost-efficient way from day one. So this all together, when you get all this kind of coalescing, that drives a seamless customer experience end to end, and then fuels your net retention strategy. So I'm going to put this out there. I know for so long, there's so many people when they hear customer success and sales, they almost think of them as like in opposition of one another. We've got to put that behind us and start to accept that this is one continuous journey. So I'm saying it's the end of pre-sales and post-sales as we know it. And customer success is just a continuation and an extension of that first, pre-sales conversation, where we're just going to build upon that as we engage with our customers. So let's dig a little bit more into the how. So we've talked about what do we mean by customer success as a growth engine? Why is it important? It's obviously driving, incredible financial returns for our businesses, but what are we seeing show up and bubble up to the top in terms of strategies and initiatives that organizations are leaning into to make sure that they are marching in the right directions organizationally to drive towards these incredible net revenue retention rates? So we did a survey back in 2020 with some CCOs across lots of SaaS enterprise companies, and these are the 5 that bubbled to the top. I'm going to spend probably the most time today on a few slides around what we call end-to-end value realization, just to showcase what do we mean by that. And then we'll touch on the next 4, which is driving product adoption, risk management, onboarding, and aligning roadmap to client needs. Interestingly enough, this ties back very neatly to that triangle. I like to call it the triangle offense slide that we showed you. And these are sort of the strategies and the workflows that support all of those teams locking arms and working together. So let's talk a little bit about what do we mean by end-to-end value realization. So this is all oriented in the notion of we've got to work backwards from the goal. I mean, for years and years and years and years, I would say almost every sales organization is having some type of goal-oriented ROI business case with our customers. But where it often fell down is those conversations weren't formulated into like what I like to call a value framework that is used not in sales, but it's a common language that everyone in the entire organization is trained on, and then drives the way that we engage with our customers, and quite honestly, the way that we build our product. So this is starting with defining those outcomes up front, clearly sending those over to the professional services and the customer success organization, which in turn is going to allow us to more quickly drive to that first value moment and maturing usage, with an end goal being 2 things. Obviously, we want them to renew, but if we're able to more quickly drive them up that value maturity curve, then the financial outcomes of that is we're most likely going to be able to expand to additional outcomes. And then we fuel that advocacy motion of having advocates and proof points to bring new logos in the door and then drive new use cases and expansions within our portfolio base. So this is sort of the visualization of sales and professional services and customer success. It's that linkage and connective tissue where sales, here's an example, in the opportunity object, defining that MEDDIC criteria, that neatly feeding into a success plan that your professional services and your customer success organization uses to baseline the value and the outcomes, and then to measure and track that realization time and time again. So I wanted to show you a real quick slide just to maybe make this a little bit more tangible. Here's an example of our outcomes framework. We actually call it Operationalizing Outcomes at Gainsight, where we've mapped out what are the top 6 business challenges that our customers typically, partner with Gainsight to help them solve. And it's taking those business challenges and mapping them to processes or use cases, and then a clearly defined success metric that we're going to use to baseline the starting point and the ending point. And those translate into what we call verified outcomes here at Gainsight. Interestingly enough, our CSM organization is even incentivized on verified outcomes. So we've kind of put a stake in the ground and we say, while adoption is necessary, it's not sufficient. And how do we rally the whole organization around this continuous language of outcomes and delivering to that time and time again? So this is probably one of the top two things that comes up in every single executive conversation I have with CS practitioners today is we're trying to do this end-to-end value or outcomes framework across our organization. So the next big theme and focus area outside of outcomes, I'd say this is number two that I see in my conversations is how do we do customer success at scale? How do we drive adoption? How do we lead our customer to water in terms of their outcomes, but not just by using our human resources, which are our great, amazing CSMs. How do we augment that and leverage technology to deliver the right message at the right time, at the right place in the journey? So these are some examples of ways that this is showing up. And there's kind of two compartments to this to unpack. One is just leaning into richer data and product insights. So you'll see at the bottom, just the telemetry and the usage data and the sophistication that CS organizations are using today is incredibly rich. And that's how you get really precise and mature and sophisticated in terms of understanding the behavior patterns of your customers. Where are they getting stuck? How does product then go take that information and optimize that within the product? Or how do we use that information when we see them getting stuck to then lean into product-led journeys? And that's what you see here. What I call digital-led customer success, or using your product or app to guide the customer journey in a more self-serve manner, I believe is actually the future of customer success. So things like automated usage reports, guided tutorials or walkthroughs in the product, and you can personalize these based on different types of personas or maturity of usage, getting feedback in product. This is sort of the evolution of customer success right now, where we're able to use this rich data and bring this in product to really nurture and drive our customers on these personalized value journeys. The third thing, I think this has always sort of been a fundamental part of customer success. We're just seeing folks sort of elevate the way that they're doing this, is what I call proactive risk management. So this shows up, top to bottom in terms of your segmentation tier. But when you think about your top set of customers that have the largest revenue impact, usually there's a systematic and way that these are being managed on a week in, week out basis. So here's an example. We have a health scoring framework that we call DEAR, Deployment, Engagement, Adoption, ROI. It's sort of our health scoring methodology. And having a way to look at the health scores on an aggregate level across, a target portfolio to understand what's working, what are the signals if something's off, and then mapping playbooks against, all of these, leading indicators and signals when something maybe isn't heading in the right direction. And then part two of this is what we call stakeholder alignment. Some folks may call it, executive sponsorship program, but really this notion of we cannot be single-threaded within our customers. How do we become multi-threaded? How do we know who the key influencers and stakeholders are? Define those personas, map the responsible party at your own customer, and then drive some SLAs, workflows, and accountability against it. So that's that key persona buddy mapping you see on the right, which fuels an engagement score inside of Gainsight. And then what's cool is more CS professionals. If you all saw my recent blog posts, customer success has been a little bit squishy in the past. It's these types of motions that empower us and allow us to do that rich data correlation to say, hey, we're driving, these 3 or 5 high value activities, and then tying that to those leading indicators and lagging outcomes to really know what's moving the needle, both from retention, but also from an expansion perspective. And then when we think about the customer journey, one of the most critical, what we call moments of truth, is nailing onboarding. That at the end of the day is how you really accelerate time to value, which means time to next expansion. And in many cases, it even means that the next expansion may be larger than that if you don't get this moment right. So when I see one place that customers typically start, especially as they think about how can we get more sophisticated with some of the in-app engagements, notifications, it's building this omni-channel onboarding journey typically when, there's a closed won deal, how do we automate a welcome message, from our CCO, giving them, the good feelies, day one? How do we then provide them in-app guidance based on what is the first set of 1 or 2 things we want them to do in terms of the onboarding checklist without overwhelming them in terms of the entire product? And then how do you set up your teams, your CSMs with the checklist to make sure we've done our due diligence and we followed the process, so that we're setting our customers up for success? So it's really this combination of human and digital led and in-app journeys that are really helping organizations scale this piece. But quite frankly, it's delivering a much more exceptional experience to the end user as well. And then last, but certainly not least, this is probably one of my favorite things. We have a huge initiative around this notion of customer success and product really coming together. I think we're going to see this show up much like sales and marketing did many, many years ago. At the end of the day, your CSM organization and your technology can only take your customers so far if the product market fit and the needs of your end customer are not being solved for. So this is one example of creating a systemized process to really understand there's product wants, right? The nice to haves, and then there's the product kind of need to haves. And if we don't go solve these, especially when you're talking about your highest spend customers, there could be risks of, a pretty big renewal that might not happen, or an expansion that's on the line. So this is systematizing a process to flag a product risk, which then gets handed off to the right product managers. And there's some inputs that happen in terms of what's the business impact, what exactly are they asking for? And then myself and our chief product officer, my EVP of product, we actually have weekly reviews, and we make collective decisions on what are the ones that make the most sense for the business for us to prioritize our engineering resources against. And then separately, there's lots of work streams happening, even in terms of just product roadmap in general, and making sure that it's driven with customer centricity and putting the right mechanisms and infrastructure in place with the customer success organization, since they are sort of the frontline folks that have the best pulse on the business and the customer needs. So those are just 5 of the things. Obviously, there's a lot more strategies out there. I will tell you that probably in 80% of my conversations, much of the substance is pointed at one of these 5 things. And to tie it all together and sort of put a bow on it, customer success maturity absolutely leads to growth. So if we go back to that sort of pyramid slide in the beginning, as we start to really employ some of these strategies around net retention that are very cross-functional in nature, how do we really think about the customer journey end to end, speak the outside in language of our customers, drive them towards our goals, make sure that we have the feedback mechanisms in place to share this back with product and other teams? You'll see that as you climb through sort of these maturity stages, from reactive to what we say insights and actions, to outcomes, to transformations, there's incredible business benefit to be had, where your gross retention can have upwards of a 13% lift. And then you see net retention is even that much more incredible, with over 30 percentage points of NRR lift when you get to the transformation stage. So there is no doubt that customer success is showing up as a very, very strategic, not only function within the business, but quite honestly, it's a part of the broader strategy of the executive teams and organizations. And I cannot wait to see where this trends over the next 3 to 5 years as the SaaS world continues to accelerate. So thank you for having me, and we will try and answer any questions that you may have in the chat.